The story itself is very, very different from most UFO stories because it actually runs backwards. It works backwards, which is what fascinated me when I first heard the tale. And that is that the majority of stories, you have an absolutely cracking story with loads of visuals in it. People talk about these flying saucers descending in lights, and there's all these, you can imagine the special effects and all the rest of it. And most programmes do a really good job of the reconstructions, and they have all the eyewitnesses on. And when it comes to the end of the programme and it comes to the crunch, they can't show you anything. There's like a bump in the ground, or a broken twig, or a burn mark on a tree, or some light, blurred light in the sky, and that's it. But this story is the exact reverse. What we had to do was we had to start with the evidence, and the evidence are these fragments from the UFO. We've got 3 pieces of the green outer shell of some kind of vehicle. We've got the inside of the casing in the forms of pieces of foil, and there's at least 100 other fragments scattered all the way around the country that we know of. So we're starting with the evidence. I'm actually sat there holding a piece of a flying saucer, a piece of a UFO, and I'm thinking, what on earth is this? Here it is. How did it get here? What's the story? In January 1983, a mysterious flying craft of some kind crashed in fields just outside Aberystwyth in mid-Wales. Strangely, only one local newspaper was to run the story about this event, and yet it could prove to be as significant as the Roswell crash in New Mexico. Can we claim to have hard evidence of this craft? Well, watch on.
From that day to this, it still remains unidentified. No aircraft was missing, no pilots were missing, no mechanical things were found on the site. We can only conclude that this remains debris from a UFO, an unidentified flying object.
In 1983, one of the world news clipping agencies sent Gary Rowe a clipping of a crash near Aberystwyth in mid-Wales. This is the story that followed. The report in a national newspaper was headed "Strange Debris Out of the Sky," and it was from the Sunday Express, the 23rd of January 1983. It indicated that an unidentified flying object had crashed in Wales. The similarities with the famous Roswell incident became gradually too obvious. Though Gary was fortunate enough to be living in North Wales at the time, nonetheless the reported incident was some considerable distance, so he contacted the farmer and obtained his permission to visit the crash site. After hastily organising a reconnaissance team and several hours of driving, the team arrived. As the team examined the damage, Mr. Evans recounted the entire series of events from the beginning. He began. The incident must have happened in the dead of night, as there was no sign of the debris late on the previous evening. Early the following morning, as he trudged the fields to tend his newborn lambs, he was confronted with masses of scattered debris extending over an area of 4 of his fields. He telephoned the local police station. The local police arrived, and after they had conducted a brief examination, the RAF were called in. They removed every scrap of evidence that they could find, and only one section taken away had what looked like part of a number on it. The pieces ranged in size from 1 inch to 6 feet. The men continued the search by torchlight as darkness fell. Mr. Evans described it as a scene straight from a James Bond movie. So thorough was the military clean-up operation that both metal detecting and archaeology were unable to shed any more light on the UFO crash. All of the fields and the forest had been completely cleared of all the evidence. Maybe the answer to all this rests with the civilian UFO crash recovery team who got there before the military clean-up operation. Or is this just going to turn into another story of strange noises, vanished evidence and weird lights in the sky? It's impossible for us to be the only intelligent life. That is absolutely out of the question. I mean, you've only got to gaze out to those stars and out to that star field and realise that there are countless, millions of planets out there, any one of which could be the same as us. So there's absolutely no reason why there shouldn't be another life form that has developed further than we have. But by further, obviously, that beggars different definition. It's very difficult to say what further would be. You know, maybe they've survived, they've changed, they've got technology we haven't got, they're using things we don't have. Maybe there is something out there in the universe we don't know about, and they've got it and we haven't. You know, travel in the light spectrum or something, so they're able to jump from one place to another faster than we are. So they're doing something we're not. By virtue of the fact we don't know what they're doing, that's what makes them unidentified, that's what makes them a mystery. So I'm quite willing to accept that there is actually life out there. That doesn't present a problem. But the second alternative, which I find more intriguing, and it's a lot harder to prove, there is a possibility that we are doing something now that seriously affects our future, and that those people who are out there in the future have found some way to come back. So maybe the flying saucers we're seeing are in fact time machines. They're coming back from our own future to try to influence us and change us in some way, which means that maybe we do survive and we do develop on and we do come up with new inventions and new ideas. You know, maybe the physics is altered in some way such that we can break through and cheat time in that way. But I think it could be one of those two possibilities. If I was a betting man, if I was going to lay odds, I would say it's either it's a civilization from another planet that's more advanced than us, or it's ourselves or something we've created coming back at this time because it's an important time in our history. The second one's quite appealing because I'm an archeologist, so in a very physical sense I'm involved in time travel. I'm picking things up that were dropped by people in the past, and the possibility that something may break through from the future intrigues me. I mean, people always look for a third way, and it's a reasonable third way, okay? I know that there are things out there for which we do not have an explanation. Not just in terms of UFO debris, but in other areas as well. When you start looking at things that turn up on archaeological sites that shouldn't, which is termed alien technology, you know, things pop up in places where they're not supposed to, at times when they're not supposed to, you know. Sooner or later you have to accept that there are mysteries out there, which are very difficult to pin on us. It's very difficult to actually say that it's us that's doing them. And in the modern day and age, I think a lot of the books that have been produced and things, it's actually easier for people to believe that it's not us. It's easier to say, well, it must be something else. It's interesting to note here that the RAF search team at the site were unable to recognise any of the debris that belonged to any known aircraft. They also admitted to being baffled as their radar scanners had not detected the incident or anything unusual leading up to the incident. In fact, 2 weeks later they admitted that they were still unable to confirm that it was aircraft material they had recovered, let alone offer an explanation. In their own words, an RAF spokesman said, "The debris certainly had nothing to do with us. We are examining the fragments to try to piece them together in the hope of a clue as to where it came from and what it is." We dispatched professional historian and researcher Scott Lloyd to the National Library of Wales to see if any other newspapers of the day carried the story of the UFO crash.
Well, from the date you gave me, I went to the National Library of Wales in Aberystwyth, which is not that far away from the site, and I went through all the local newspapers for a week before and a couple of weeks after, trying to see if there's any reference to an object crashing in a field in Llanilar. The local papers deal with every minor event that happens in the local villages, and I was very surprised to find no reference to it whatsoever, which I thought was a little unusual. However, there was some correspondence in the Cambrian news between locals of the area discussing the fact that Hercules aircraft had been flying very low in the area, but that was the closest I could find to anything crashing. I find it very unusual that an event that could reach a national newspaper wasn't recorded in the local newspapers, and this is in English and Welsh. So there's 3 or 4 local papers I looked at. So really I'd be interested to see what other evidence we can gather. This article here is a photocopy, so unfortunately we don't have the whole page, which would give us a definite dateline on the top. It's handwritten, the source, as the Sunday Express for the 23rd of January 1983, which is the period I looked at in the National Library. Now we have to hope that the person who wrote this A, got the newspaper right, and B, and probably more importantly, got the date right, otherwise I've been looking in the wrong place. Really, I'd like to continue the research by trying to contact the police in Aberystwyth to see what report they have of the incident, and also there's a reference here to the secretary of the Cardiganshire Farmers Union, so I'd also quite like to see if it's possible to speak to him, and then we can maybe narrow this down a bit more. And of course the journalist who wrote the article, an Andrew Chapman, hopefully we can get hold of him, and then maybe we can get closer to seeing why it didn't appear in any of the local newspapers. Well, that's the interesting thing. How did a journalist for a national newspaper find a story about a small village